Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MB podcast. Today I'm really excited to have special guest Tova Payne on the podcast. And Tova teaches business at the Vancouver School of Yoga in Vancouver, British Columbia. And she also teaches business at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. She's been teaching yoga since 2006. So she's got quite a bit of teaching experience, including leading retreats, creating her own yoga teacher training, as well as other entrepreneurial endeavors, including writing and publishing a book, which is definitely on my list of goals. So pretty interesting to hear about that. And so she's here to share her experience as a yoga teacher, a business teacher, and an entrepreneurial yogi. So without further ado, here's Tova. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's super cool to have you on here.
Cool. That's awesome.
Awesome. Well, if you want to start by telling me sort of your background and how you got into yoga, that would be awesome.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because before I moved to Vancouver, I was traveling and, I had traveled many times. Like my first big travel was to Costa Rica for 3 months of backpacking.
Awesome.
And then, ever since then, I was in the middle of my university years, I knew I just wanted to go back. It was all I wanted. And it was on one of my travels where someone I met had talked about yoga. And I think that that's what first planted that in my head. So maybe 2002, just even the concept of it. Because I don't even think it was even all that big back then. And then it would take me a few years before I actually physically practiced.
Yeah.
And then, so 2004, 2005. And at first I started off with videos, and then I had a roommate. I came to Vancouver sort of as a traveler, but also I decided to go back to school for nutrition. And then my roommate was a Bikram yoga teacher. So I said, okay, fine, I'll check out her class. And, what I loved about going into that hot room is that for me, it didn't even feel hot. I had also spent a lot of time in Guatemala City where it's super hot.
Yeah.
So being in that room felt like coming home. It felt so good. I felt so free. And, I don't know if I answered your question or if I veered really off track there.
No, that's perfect. You totally answered it.
And I think I'm one of those people, that first class, it was just pure magic, and although I hadn't done even videos, it just felt so natural, somehow my body already knew these movements, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool.
Yeah. And my background, what I had studied in university was psychology. But for me, the yoga was working I think now they even call it somatic psychology. It was all that stuff I had learned was working its way through the body, if that makes sense. And I was wow, this is magical.
That's so cool. So were you pretty hooked on Bikram right away, or did you kind of veer off into other styles?
I was hooked onto Bikram throughout the winter months. But the moment it got hot or warmer outside, I was done. It was cold turkey, stop, completely done, ready to play with new styles.
Yeah. So
I loved it for a period, and I was someone who went every single day, and it was I think I needed it. I never did yoga. I don't know if this is going to make sense for the physical exercise or the physical practice.
Yeah.
I was always doing it more for the emotional benefits. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that people show up on their mat for all different reasons, but it's cool to hear about somebody who's not showing up just for the physical, because I feel like yoga does really give that emotional, mental clarity and release or whatever you need in that moment.
Yeah. And then I'm trying to remember, I think I did check out a few other like real life classes, but I was like taking out every video. And then what happened is that all the videos to me were pretty bland, pretty like they were all the same. They all focused only on like the physical posture, which has its benefit, but I felt it like wasn't giving me what I needed. And then I came upon, it was like VHS, because this is back before, stuff. And it was Brian Kest.
Okay.
I don't know. Have you heard of Brian Kest?
Yeah. He's big in like the power yoga community.
Yeah. Like, I think, there's controversy between who coined the term power yoga, but he's one of them who coined the term. And he even started like donation-based studios in Los Angeles. And anyways, but his video, like the things he spoke about was different than anyone else. It helped me really understand why I was doing what I was doing. And he really focused on, listening to yourself, like honoring the teacher within. And he didn't like particularly use those exact words per se, but it was like there was something about the way he spoke through the poses that shifted everything for me and really made yoga make sense for me.
That's awesome. I haven't listened to any of his videos, but I love the idea of everyone being their own teacher. Like a teacher can be there to guide you through the practice, but really allowing yourself to really like listen to your body and be your own teacher. Exactly.
Yeah. And, and then I just felt like, okay, I must go down to LA and take his class. Like I found him on VHS, and then I was like, I have to meet this teacher. And then I went, and it was the best experience of my life. And then for years, I kept going down just to like learn from him. Sometimes I'd go to workshops where he was doing them in San Fran or something, so I get to travel, and I just sort of made my own yoga retreat learning experiences, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good for you.
Yeah, and it was, I don't know if I sort of, like with the yoga, it impacted my life so strongly because I had just, like I had finished a psych degree. I had also finished holistic nutrition training, but it was like yoga that had the biggest impact on my life. And so I felt like there was no question. It was like a must do. Like the soul was like, this is it. So I took a yoga teacher training in Mexico. It was one of those 1 month immersions.
Yeah.
And to me, like that, and that was the start then of my yoga teaching, and that was 2006. So.
That's awesome. And did you just jump into being a teacher right away, or was it more of like a self-practice for you?
No, I jumped in right away. And I knew, like, I had no, what's funny is that when I was practicing yoga every single day, at that time, I was working at a gym, and I'd often take clients on a workout program. But then I was so excited by yoga, I'd say to them, do you want me to show you some, like, poses I've learned? And, to them, it was a bonus. They didn't have to pay anything. So they got some, like, personal, almost yoga training. And I didn't even know how to teach then, but I was just so eager to share, like, the excitement. I couldn't help myself.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So for me, yoga teacher training, like I was doing it I had a knowing that a yoga teacher training would create like a life transformation, which it did. And I also knew I wanted to be away from my environment, like not be in the city and not have to deal with everyday life. Yeah. I really wanted the immersion. But I also knew and felt like compelled that I was going to teach. And so that was all I knew.
That's amazing. It's cool to hear about you knowing that you wanted to go away, because I was the exact same way. Like, cool. I was just like, I need to be somewhere else to do this, and I want to go somewhere and just be immersed in it for 30 days. And like, I think that there's so many pros towards doing it over like a 4, 6, or 9 month period, or whatever it is that you choose to do. Mm-hmm. But like being fully in it for that period of time is so amazing.
Totally. I'm so curious. Where did you go?
I went to Bali.
Oh, wow. So nice.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So similar to you, like a hot tropical location. I don't know. Maybe it's I also love to travel. So maybe it's the mutual love of travel that kind of brought us to different places and kind of made us want to go there.
And that's exactly what it was. It's like I wanted to travel, I wanted yoga, I wanted immersion. And it's so funny. So this is 2006, and like things have changed so much. But back then, I Googled like yoga teacher training, immersion, or whatever, and it was so hard to find anything. Like I had to search and search. I remember it was like many days and going through pages and pages to find anything. Like I found the Shivananda training in the Bahamas, and that one didn't feel like the right fit. And then when I finally found, I went to the Yandara Yoga Institute in Mexico. It was like, okay. But now if you go online, it's like there are thousands. It's like, how do you even choose?
Yeah,
you know?
I was just going to say, I kind of wish that would have been my case. Mine was like, like 20 tabs pulled up, like scrolling through their programs, trying to find the difference. Like coming back to some, being like, no, that's not right. Like it was probably one of the most overwhelming decisions I made. And even after I booked it, I was like, ooh, I hope this was the right choice.
Exactly. And it's so funny, right? Because it is overwhelming. It's like when there's so much choice, it actually makes it a lot harder, not easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially when you're forking out a big chunk of money. And I think that was for me, it was just hoping that it was going to be worth my money, and it definitely was. So I'm happy with that experience, but there was definitely a fear element that kind of lingered for me after I booked it. Like, I hope this is right.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah.
You kind of have to trust your gut though, and like get the right feeling for something.
Definitely. Yeah. I think that's the most important thing all the time, like life, business, work, everything. But definitely for anyone who's thinking about like taking a teacher training, you've got to trust that, like, have that feeling of like, this is it. This is the one.
Yeah. It's such an obscure piece of advice to give, and it sounds so fluffy. Like it's not really a tangible thing, right? Where it's, you should look for X, Y, Z, but it is kind of the best piece of advice. Like do your research, do your homework, and just like get a good feeling about what you're reading and reach out to that person and, go with your intuition.
Totally. I think it's also important. I know this might not be a little off topic, but maybe it's exactly what people need to hear. Like when looking for teacher training, I think it's important to get clear within yourself. What do you want? And I think that if, let's say, you want to go away somewhere and that's your priority, then let that be the priority. But otherwise, I think it's really important to take a look at the head teacher and to make sure that you resonate with that teacher. Mm-hmm. For me, that's not something I did or looked at because I just knew I wanted to go away and there wasn't much choice back then. But I would think to myself that if not for knowing I wanted to go away and not having much choices back then, like I think one of the important things is to make sure that you resonate with the teacher. That would be my advice. Know what you want from a training. If you know you want to go away, let that be the priority. But otherwise, make sure you resonate with the teacher or the core philosophy, and don't hesitate, obviously, to like reach out to them and ask questions. And then from there, you can really like trust your gut and get a good feeling if this is the right spot for you.
Yeah, I love that advice. I think that's great. And so with your teaching, you came back and you jumped right in. Can you tell me a little bit more about the progression of your career as a yoga teacher?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I knew I wanted to teach right away. So what I did was I made a resume, like just any way that I knew how to make a resume. I didn't have any particular advice. I just did it from what I knew in the past. And I just walked everywhere that I would be willing to teach at. And I just, spoke to who was at the front desk. And I knew to at least say that I want to be on your sub list. That was one thing that I'd been told, because I recognized that most studios or gyms, most are full. And even back then, over 10 years ago or 10 years ago now, even back then, like most spaces were already full. And so you just asked to be on a sub list because things always change. So that's what I did. And then in terms of, I had a connection, someone who recommended me. So I had a gig that was secure, maybe for, let's say, February. Okay. But what happened is that before that started, I got one of those last minute phone calls, because sometimes a studio or a gym, in this case it was a gym, their teacher canceled on them pretty last minute.
Yeah.
So they were in a panic, probably just calling everyone, seeing who could fill in, who could sub that night. So I looked at my phone and I noticed I'd missed a call. I listened to the message. And in that moment, my instant reaction was like, ignore, like just too scared. Like, I can't do this. I'm not prepared. It's tonight. How can I do that? But I always say, like, thank God that something else inside me said, call back, just do it. And so that was my first class. Like, it was, not much time to prepare, just show up. And I remember just like saying, dear universe, please help me. And it was awesome. And, I think it depends on the person and your training, but I could speak for myself. I was quite limited because even a 200-hour training, as much as you've learned, it takes years to really gather experience. But you just go in with what you have, you just teach. You share, that's all you can do. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, I think people can feel your energy. And so whether or not you screw up how you're physically teaching a pose or you mess up the right and left, ultimately people don't care about that. I feel people care about the energy that you bring. And I think that's the most important. And I know at that spot, they really liked me. I was called within a few days. I got that spot permanently. And then as time went on, they just kept giving me classes. And I ended up teaching 6 or 7 classes there weekly. So I was really on their schedule. And so that's how it starts. You got to say yes to when the opportunity comes, and you just got to go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. That's such amazing advice and such a cool story to hear. It's always nice to hear that, I feel like fear is a big thing for, I think, pretty much every new yoga teacher. And it's nice to hear, even when somebody's been teaching for a while, that they had that the first time that they taught.
Oh, yeah. And you know what? Back then, the school I went to, they've grown and changed a lot, and how they teach teacher training has changed a lot. But when I was there, the school was fairly new. And so I recognized that even how we were taught was somewhat limited. And I only actually felt like I was trained in hatha, not necessarily flow or power. But flow and power had also been my practice. And so even though I started to, after a couple months, feel pretty confident with hatha, one day, I was asked, can I fill in a power? And, it was harder to teach, but it's step up to that challenge. If you're ever asked to teach a different style, if it's been your practice, it's you just have to say yes. You just have to go for it, because I feel it's only through your action that you can truly enhance your teaching. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice for people, because I think that sometimes it's oh no, that's not my style. I can't do it. And I mean, maybe there's maybe teaching an Ashtanga primary series is so far off that it's way too difficult. But I think that, within the vinyasa, hatha, power sort of genre of yoga, it's nice to kind of branch out and just, do what you can do.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah.
And just try it too. I feel like that's the biggest thing. You can't really figure out what you love unless you kind of give it a shot and see if you do or don't like it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And even that's so true when it comes to where would you teach? And this is often something I'll say to students now. Let's say when I'm teaching at the Vancouver School of Yoga, I think it's important to examine if you have any biases. Some people will say, I will never want to teach at that studio, or I wouldn't want to teach at a gym, or it's but the truth is, until you actually go in, feel the energy of that place, see how you really feel, sometimes you'll surprise yourself that an environment that you think wouldn't be good for you to teach in ends up being one of your favorite environments to teach. So
yeah, I love that. It's cool too to see what sort of students show up too, and what you can provide for those students as a teacher.
Yes, I love what you say. And if I understand you, then I think how when I was teaching, because I would teach at gyms and at studios. As time went on, I taught at all different studios throughout the city. But what I loved about gyms is that I found people who would never walk into a studio for whatever reason. They would feel comfortable to just slide into the gym class, because maybe I remember this one guy with a punching bag, just like, but he had to take the punching bag down because the class was about to start. And I remember he decided, he was like, am I allowed to join the class? I'm like, yeah, of course, please. Yeah. And I feel like someone like that, he never would have come to a class ever, but it's because it was right there. He was there. The opportunity was there. And it's a very non-intimidating environment. And so I love being able to teach people that may otherwise never get an opportunity to have the experience. And so for me, that's really fulfilling. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing as somebody who loves yoga to share yoga with people who maybe think that yoga is not for them. And then they can have this moment of like, oh, this is like what yoga is all about. Like, this is kind of cool.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible. Mm-hmm. And then at what point did you start making your way into leading retreats?
Okay, so retreats was pretty right away too, because so for me, I had been a traveler since I want to say 17, but 19 was when I took off to Costa Rica. And so traveling to me was like, I would say, looking back, I recognize it was really like my first soul journey, like really understanding myself, life, etc. So travel has always almost been like a mode of healing. Mm-hmm. And then when I discovered yoga, it was the same thing. It was like that inner journey, inner freedom, inner healing. And so I always felt the two together make this perfect pair. So when I had finished my teacher training and I had been teaching, I wanted to help someone with their retreat so that I could sort of learn and just watch how a retreat unfolds. And so I went online and I found, I don't know if you've heard of them, Milagro Retreats. Her name is Shani Cranston. She does stuff in like Tofino surf and yoga. And I think she does stuff in Baja, Mexico too. So I'm not sure because I haven't checked out her site in a while. But she was the person that I raised my hand to do a karma exchange. So that basically meant teach a class or two in exchange for coming. And it was awesome. I had fun. But I was also being a detective. I was like watching what is happening, how things are unfolding. And then for me, that was enough to like have the confidence of just like, all right, go do it now.
That's so amazing. I love that.
And I think I've always jumped in. And then so I jump. I do always learn lessons. And then I take those lessons and I make the next retreat better. But yeah, I just, on my own, when I got to Vancouver, I still love to travel, and I would go off to a lot of the BC islands. And then I had found a favorite island. It was Gabriola. And I remember thinking, this is where I want to do retreat. So when I finally put on my first retreat, I had already made some connections with some of the locals, with the national park there. So I had like a couple of allies, and I just like, I didn't even have business and marketing knowledge, but I was just like, I spoke to the person at the park who also runs a kayaking business and said, I want to venture yoga retreat. Would you be able to take people kayaking? Like I just, I went to the coffee shop and I said, would you be able to supply coffee or tea? I just like really walked around and just connected with people. And so I got all the pieces together and I made a flyer. I told people at my classes and the first retreat happened and that was that.
That's so awesome. What a cool way to just jump in. And what sort of things did you learn as you did more and more retreats?
Okay, well, the first one, everyone was so kind because they all wrote me nice testimonials and they all said they had a great time. But on my part, I clearly saw that what I was lacking was proper support for weather conditions you cannot control, especially in British Columbia where it can rain, And so I didn't have just some certain proper setups. just like little things. Like a lot of stuff I had thoroughly thought through. Like, some people, they won't think about waivers and all the legal stuff, but for some reason I've always been really mindful of all that. So I had that in place, but I felt what I didn't have in place was just like a proper, like one of those really nice tents.
Okay.
So some of the money that I had made from that first retreat, I just invested it so that the next one I'd make it even nicer. Just little things like that. Like even for the first retreat, I thought about, like, anytime you do anything in business, I think it's nice to surprise people, give something a little extra, like a care package, just like a little care bag. And I remember, I think it was the first one, I even asked Vega. I don't know if people know about Vega, but they make like natural like food bars, etc.
I love Vega bars.
Yeah, like I just wrote them an email and said, would you sponsor this retreat, give some food? And they gave more than I ever needed.
So cool that they just did that. Like you just shot the email out and they're just like, yeah, cool, we'll help out. Exactly.
And sometimes it's surprising. Like I think sometimes you don't realize how many resources and help is out there until you ask for it. Mm-hmm. But I also realize that some of these things, some people don't even necessarily think about, like people who want to run a retreat. And I think that after all the years of doing different things and seeing like what worked best, I actually ended up creating a program, which I now sell off my website. It's called Build Your Own Retreat. And I give people like all the steps, because I recognize that not all people are necessarily just going to jump in and just go for it. And so people who want to have those steps and feel more confident, I ended up creating like a teaching home study course so that people can feel confident to run their own.
Yeah, I love that. I'll definitely put a link to that when I write up like your episode post for this so that people can definitely check that out if that's something that they want to do. Because I think you're right about that. Like a lot of people are kind of like, yeah, this seems like a really great idea. Like I want to do this. I mean, it's an amazing way to connect with your students a little bit more, to travel and to have more one-on-one time and provide sort of like a therapeutic, like week-long adventure, whatever you're looking for. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of logistics around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And there's always little things. So, but I always tell people, if you just want to go for it, just go. You'll learn. But if you don't feel confident and you need those like structures and anchors, then get the support you need. I think it's like that for everything.
Yeah. I think that your story is a great reminder that, asking for help is so key. Like, I think it's really easy to be like, oh, like, Vega will never give me free stuff. Like, they're a massive corporation. Why would they give me stuff? But you just never know until you ask.
Totally. And I honestly can't remember. There was one more place that also gave stuff, and I don't remember who it is anymore. And then I remember there was this like healthy, they made like breakfast items, like healthy muffins, all this stuff. They don't exist anymore. But I just went in there. I didn't know if they would cater and make a special like big batches just, for me, because they don't advertise that service. But sometimes you just have to go in and ask, and people will say yes. Like, you don't know unless you ask. And yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's great. And then getting into, you said you also created yoga teacher trainings. At what point did that sort of become a thing in your career?
Yeah, so I think it was around the 3-year mark. And what happened was, so I always believe in like follow the teacher within and what the soul is asking to do. And so I just felt this like absolute clarity, like it's time to, I don't know if I want to say it like this, but I can't think of other words, but I felt it was time for that next level of teaching. Mm-hmm. I had been teaching full time, like, 10 to 13 classes a week in privates for a while. And I just felt like there was something more. I wanted a deeper connection. I wanted to have time to teach the deeper layers and the essence of yoga and more than what you can deliver in a class. So I just knew that teacher training was my next step. And I didn't have logistics in place, but I felt compelled to start writing a manual. And if you go on the Yoga Alliance website, they make it very clear for anyone who wants to create a 200-hour teacher training exactly what you need personally as a teacher to even be like ready. Like you have to be at least 2 years, over 1,000 hours of teaching, etc. But they also clearly lay out what's expected in terms of like curriculum.
Yeah.
And there's some flexibility. So I just, I looked at what would be required. I started to create it. And I just knew I had to create it. And then I thought to myself, I love to teach. I love to create. At that time, this was like 2009, 2010, I did not feel ready to handle the logistics. So that's like the financial risk, having a space, marketing, all of that. I didn't want that part. So I put it out to the universe. I said, okay, I'd like to find someone that I can like lead this training through. And it came about that I had like 2 offers. And one offer looked a little better, so I went with that place. So I guess in a way you can think of that as like a partnership. Mm-hmm. And that's how I led my first training.
So with the partnership with the studio, did you pay to rent out the studio from them?
No. So the way it worked was this person handled all the money stuff, and we came to an agreement at that point what I'd be paid and stuff. And for me, you see, I was still fairly new, and I wasn't as business savvy as I am now. And I think this happens with a lot of new teachers. And I was just excited. I just want to teach, and I created this manual, and I was also very trusting. We had a verbal agreement, and, I learned a lot of lessons because the partnership didn't really end so excellent.
Yeah.
but like for me at the time, it was just like, I just want to give. I like to create and give. I don't care. I don't need, have all these, I don't even know the words right now, legal rights on the copy, intellectual property, all that jazz. So, now I would teach teachers, like, be mindful of all those things. But back then I was just so excited,
Yeah.
So the contract was what it was, and I loved the teaching. It was a very enjoyable experience, but there did come a point where the person that I had partnered with, they changed their contract terms. And I came to a point, and again, I felt like my soul, my insides, if I ever start to feel nauseous or like something isn't right, then I know it's time to step away and say goodbye. I think in life and business and work, there's often opportunities that might still look good or that you feel you must hold on to for security. Mm-hmm. But if your insides, your soul are saying this isn't a good fit anymore, it's like you have to be willing to let go and then to just trust. And so, for a couple years, I think it was 2013, I led the last training. And one day I might recreate and do trainings again. But at that same point, it was around 2012 that I also started to feel a shift. Never mind all this contract business, but I started to feel an inner call, if this makes sense, to expand how I teach and share and not limit it to yoga, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. Mm-hmm. And so with the things that you've learned with like that partnership and that like designing your yoga teacher training, is the biggest thing that you would advise people who want to do something like that is to make sure that they've got like, the written terms, like, this is like, my stuff is copyrighted. This is mine. I don't know if you have to trademark that stuff or what sort of that process is like, and then making sure that like money and stuff is kind of like pretty secure in a written contract.
Yeah, exactly. But, what I can say is this. So all of that is right on. At the same time, I know for myself, and I also recognize for others, sometimes you'll say yes to things because you want the opportunity, even though there's a part of you that doesn't quite like the contract terms and conditions, or you might feel slightly manipulated. I think part of that is the practice that sometimes we need to go through in order to be able to strengthen our boundaries and to know that it's okay sometimes to say no, to walk away, and to know what your boundaries are. And sometimes a verbal agreement, which I had trusted, unfortunately, it's like you do have to get that down in writing and not, and no, and like, if someone says, oh, just sign it, that's just legal, we've got our verbal agreement. Like, no, you can't just like, I think it's too bad that you can't just be all like trusting and smiley, but unfortunately it's like, if something's in writing and then something is verbal and they don't match up, you do want to get them in alignment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's good to know. It's kind of something that I've heard from a few other people on the podcast is that, you want to think that people who are in your industry, have the same sort of like values and integrity that you do. And there's this whole like belief in karma and,
exactly.
How you are on the mat is how you are off the mat. But at the end of the day, you want to believe in humankind and that people are innately good, but it's still business, and there needs to be that element in it there.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a big thing. Honestly, I think that especially when it comes to yoga, you need to return to the practice in order for all business dealings to be from that place of rightness. Mm-hmm. I think what happens sometimes is people might start off with a good intention, but they lose their practice, and then they get caught up in business without keeping the soul, if that makes sense, what like the yoga's here to teach us. And I think that that's when yoga businesses get derailed from being in integrity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's not that people are intentionally trying to, deceive or trick or take away from someone, but
95%.
Sometimes it can happen.
And that's why, like, when I teach the business course, I always come from that soulful place of like, come back to your practice. Your practice is your teacher to keep you anchored, to come back to the teacher within, and to come back with your integrity. Mm-hmm. Because, you've got to make a living, but yoga is the art of living. And so make sure that you're working that art into how you're working. So.
Yeah, that's great. It's kind of this sort of fine balance. It's like walking a tightrope almost. Mm-hmm. And so after creating your yoga teacher trainings, is that when you wrote your book, or at what point did you do that?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. No, I was still leading trainings. So I had taken a year away. I went to the opposite end of Canada. And then when I came back to BC, I think I went through what they call dark night of the soul, one of those rough. And so I just although yoga was my main career path, my main entrepreneurial path, during those years, I was also a registered holistic nutritionist, and I did have clients. And even one of the gyms I worked out of, they'd always give me all their clients. So over those years, I did have nutrition clients, and I was consulting on health and wellness. That was never the main thing. So anyways, when I got back and I was just going through this period of shifting and trying to figure out what's next, even though I still was leading, I had 2 more trainings I was leading, I just started to feel like it was time to write a book on all of that nutrition stuff. I think what it was that yoga, I knew I still wanted to work with, but the nutrition, I knew it was time to say goodbye to that door. And, but I felt, I don't know if this makes sense. I wrote the book because I felt compelled to write it. I felt I had to. And I feel like part of that, that time I was going through was just this wants to come out of you. So I just, because my whole life I'd always said I wanted to write a book. I used to work when I was living in Montreal. I worked at the McGill bookstore. I worked in all the different departments. And I remember I'd be in the shipping department where all the new books come out of. And I'd think one day my book's going to come out of here. Mm-hmm. And so I always had that. Yeah. So I think that when I went through that hard time, it was it's time to do what you say you always wanted to do. You've got your topic. You've got this urge just do it. And so I think that was like what helped give me that push to do it. And the writing just really, even now, because I'm still a writer, I've got another book coming up, but I feel like writing almost comes from source. Like it's just like, thank you, universe. It just comes, you know? And like, sometimes for that book, sometimes I would have to do some research and go back into my textbooks, etc., because I was writing about something like nutrition. But at the same time, it also felt very like organic and natural and just like a good, like, this is what I need to do. So
it was kind of like your closure to the time you'd spent as a nutritionist.
Absolutely. And also, yeah, that was it. So I enjoyed the writing. For me, the hardest part was everything else. The editing, getting an editor. It's all those fine details, which I'm actually going through again. I've got a book that I've just finished. It's called Soulful Entrepreneurship.
I love that.
Yeah, but it's like, I already know from the last time that it's these end stages that can end up taking even longer than the writing process. And that's the challenge. And that's where it's like, you've got to keep on going and maintain. Just like, I guess, like yoga practice. When you're like, hey, I'm done, I'm tired. It's like, keep breathing. You know?
Yeah, definitely. And so did you go the self-publishing route with your book?
I did self-publishing, and I always tell people, you can do it too. We live in a time where it's like, the gatekeepers don't stop us anymore. If you have the drive and the discipline to write, you can publish and hold your book in your hands and sell and distribute. And I tell people, like, there's many places you can go, but Amazon has a division called Create a Space, and I say they make it very easy for you to self-publish. Yeah. So if you've got the desire, anyone can do it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like, it's a pretty cool time to be alive as an entrepreneur. There's so much opportunity, I think more so than there was like, even 10 years ago.
Totally. And I totally agree. And it's like, now, and what I see in people, especially people who come see me, is that often the hardest part is the action, the discipline, like doing the work, just like a yoga practice. People who say, well, I want to do yoga, but I don't have time, or I don't want to spend all that time doing it. But it's like, you've got the ability. We live in this time where so much, because of technology, often it's like so much is available to you. The only thing in your way is you. So it's like, get out of your own way and make what you want happen.
Yeah, definitely. That resonates with me. I was just going to ask you if there was any recommendations you had for like self-discipline in terms of that sort of element in your life, or that sort of aspect in your life.
Yes. Many. I give away a free guide where I talk about this stuff, but a little bit. But with discipline, it's sort of like, so number one, I think that it's very helpful to have structures in place. And so a structure could be like your calendar, your scheduler. And so look at your time. How much time do you have, right? Look at, if let's say you've got 2 hours on a Monday morning, it's like, okay, you write down, let's say you want to create a yoga workshop or you want to write a book. It's like you put that in. So that's like step one. But step two happens when like you wake up that morning, and if you're not in the mood, discipline is you show up anyways. Like in yoga, they call it tapas. It's that action of you show up, you get on the mat. The same with all of your creative work. It's like, if you want it to happen, even if you don't quite feel inspired, even on those days where you're a little tired, you show up anyways.
That's fabulous advice.
Yeah, and I also tell people, recognize what you need. If you need a little push, I recommend Stephen Pressfield. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's got this book, The War of Art.
Okay, yeah. I think my boyfriend's a big reader. I am as well, but he's a bigger reader than I am. I feel like that book has passed through our house at some point. I'll look into it though and definitely put it on the episode notes.
Awesome. Yeah. And he's got other one that's like the one I actually own is called Turning Pro and Do the Work. And so often, I mean, I face resistance all the time. When I was writing the book, I'd face resistance. So some days I'd pick up one of his books. I'd read a page or two, and it was enough for me to get inspired and do the work, you know? So, but it's like, so my advice for discipline is to recognize it's not easy. Mm-hmm. This is why most people don't do the things they say they want, but recognize that you can. And then, like, that's why self-awareness is the key to business success. Know what structures you need to have in place to help push you to get to work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing. I feel like almost anyone in any area of their life can resonate with that information. Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk about you getting into the Vancouver School of Yoga and the is it the Canada School for Nutrition, Holistic Nutrition?
The Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. And
becoming sort of is business guru the right term for that?
No, because I hate the word guru.
Okay. sits with some yogis, doesn't sit with others.
Teacher is someone who shares information. I like to share information. So I was a student at the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition back in 2005, 2006. And I'd always stayed in touch with the school. And sometimes, I'd just walk in. If I had a poster, they're very kind. If I had my own workshop I was putting on, even like a retreat or something over the years, they'd always let me post it up. And I knew the lady who did front desk at the time, though she's not there anymore. And, I said, I was on their newsletter list. So when the job opportunity opened, if they're looking for another business teacher, I was like, yeah, I love this. And I love it because 2012 or so was the time where, despite all those years of different like business ventures, entrepreneurial projects, like retreats, workshops, writing the book, etc., in 2012 was when I started to actively study business too. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I study things, I'll even get like obsessed with them. Like I'll spend all my time studying it. And so based on the studies and the experience, I felt like I want to teach this, I'm ready for that next step. And I feel like teaching is for me always that natural next step. When I love something, I want to teach it. So when I saw they're looking for the business teacher, I was like, yes, I want it. So I just applied. And then I had the interview, and they said yes.
That's incredible.
And it was actually the other teacher who she doesn't teach anymore, but she used to teach at the Vancouver School of Yoga. And so she recommended me. So for Vancouver School of Yoga, it was a recommendation. And I just felt like, thank you, universe, because for me, it felt like a perfect match because yoga is where I spent most of my entrepreneurial endeavors, and I feel I truly understand the different stages of what a yoga teacher goes through. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to teach there just felt like this is a perfect match for what I love to teach and share. So that's how that all came about.
Yeah, that's a pretty incredible story. Like the simplicity of seeing a position that interests you, applying for it, like putting it out there that you really want it, and then just getting it. It's a reminder, I think, that if we want something, we just need to go for it. Like, it doesn't need to be so difficult.
Cool. I love that you said that. Yes. And I just want to say, there's a lot of things in life sometimes that I want and I don't get. But I do believe that when it's aligned with the greater good and like the concept of wholeness, of like where you're meant to be on your path, everything clicks into place. And so I feel like in my life, the things that have come through, it's like that's the next step. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I mean, it's not enough to pray. You also need to actively take action. But I think that it's very important that like you also spend time saying something like, dear universe, if this is meant for the greater good or my highest good or the evolution of my soul, like, so be it, may this be. And I think that's really important, like have that spirit and also do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so when you're teaching people or like yoga teachers that are going to go out in the world to teach yoga, the lessons of business. Is it sort of a combination of what you've learned about business plus your own experiences, or do you draw from one more than the other?
No, I'd say absolutely both. And the way I teach at the nutrition school is different than the yoga school. And then for the yoga school, the business of yoga at the yoga school is twofold. One, it's just the business of being a yoga teacher, so just even how to get a class and all of that stuff. But then there's also the logistics of, let's say you did want to open and operate your own, let's say, studio or business. So for the yoga training, we will cover both. Mm-hmm. But I will share, I'll share a combination based on experience, but also practical advice. Like when it comes to, let's say, license, registration, all of that, it's like black and white. But when it comes to other things, I can share different marketing strategies, different promotional strategies. And I think that for business, especially a yoga business, the most important strategy on top of that stuff is like meditation, spending that time getting clear and getting connected from the inside so that you do take clear action.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's awesome to hear. I mean, I have a Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Calgary, and it's interesting because they'll teach you so many things from a textbook and all these ways to, run a business or do things in the business world. But never once would you hear a professor being like, you should sit down and just get really clear on what your intention is and what you want. And I think that that's so important.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. What are some of the other, just a couple of top things that you would teach new yoga teachers that we can sort of leave listeners with?
Oh, well, number one, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but I do believe your practice is everything. And I don't just mean the physical asana. I think that as you practice the physical asana and you start to understand poses deeper, you'll become a better teacher. But when I say your practice, it could look like different things. It might be physical asana. It could be time in nature, meditation, a combination. But those are the things that's always going to help you come back to that space of clarity, connection, alignment, so that instead of feeling overwhelmed or scared or unsure, you're very clear in how to move forward. Even if there is a little bit of nervousness because it's new territory outside the comfort zone, if it's right action, you'll take action. But I feel it's your practice that will give you that strength to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So really, especially for yoga teachers, that's my number one advice. But number two is when you get inspired, take action.
Okay.
This is a quote from Mary Morrissey, and she goes, "Inspiration without action is merely entertainment."
So is that in terms of a yoga teacher's teaching? Or just in general with anything in their career, for example, you feeling really inspired with, to write your book type thing?
Exactly, with anything. So whether it's, let's say you get inspired, sometimes when you're practicing asana, you might come up with an innovative flow, an innovative way to teach a pose or a different variation of a pose. If you get inspired and think, I want to teach this next class, but you get a bit scared because maybe you think it's too different, inspiration without taking action, it's not anything. So it's if you get inspired so go teach it. Or let's say one day in a meditation, you get inspired to do a workshop or, create a retreat. It's go for it. When you get inspired by something, it's not just enough to get inspired and have that moment of feeling really good. It's take action. You do need to work in the physical world and not just the soul world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's a good reminder because I feel like most people can probably, even practitioners, can resonate with that. Especially in Shavasana or maybe restorative yoga, those poses where you hold it a long time, you're kind of in your mind. And sometimes you get these really great ideas and then you come out of it and you're like, that was kind of crazy. I don't really know what I was thinking there.
Exactly. But when those ideas come, it's like that's the magic. Those are the innovative, creative ideas full of magic. Yeah.
Cool. I love that. Is there any other pieces of advice that you would give?
Well, I'm trying to think now. Like, a part of me wants to say that it's okay, be kind and patient with yourself, give yourself permission to pause, especially when it comes to, this then might go back to like signing contracts, or if there's something you're unsure about, give yourself permission to take some time with it. You know, not everything has to be like right now. You know, anything that you might think of as a failure is not a failure. It's a learning experience. It's all in how you deal with it afterwards. So let's say even a class. Let's say you had a terrible class. Let's say you felt terrible about it. Well, instead of beating yourself up, it's like, can you take a moment to pause, think about, well, what can you at least learn from that? You know, chances are it wasn't that bad, and just like, it's okay, share again. Mm-hmm. And then, like, I think ultimately it's remember, like, especially in a yoga or like a heart-centered business, it's not about a performance. This is about sharing, giving, being of service. I think if you're always coming from that place of giving, sharing, you're not going to be worried so much about what others are going to think of you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really, really good advice. I think it's easy to get caught up in this, like, as a new yoga teacher, and I think as a yoga teacher in general, this sort of, you know, wanting people to like your class and wanting people to, you know, laugh if you make a joke or that sort of thing. And just remembering that it's not about entertaining them. It is about, you know, kind of giving back to them and sharing what you know as a yoga teacher with them to, you know, empower them and better their lives.
Exactly. And again, like I think I said this earlier, I believe it all comes down to energy. People can feel your energy. Yeah, and I think that often it's our fears that hold us back. Mm-hmm. So it's just like, I think that the easiest way to get rid of fear, or maybe not get rid of it, but really push it off in the corner so it's not like driving your choices, come back to that place of giving, being of service, supporting, sharing, and then that's what will drive the action.
Yeah.
Instead of letting fear drive normally non-action. And I mean, that's the way that then you'll go on to teach or whatever creative endeavor you have in your life.
Yeah. I think that resonates with me. That's awesome advice. So thank you for that.
Cool. Awesome.
I want to be respectful of your time, but do you have time for one more question?
Sure, if I have an answer.
It's just something that I've been asking everyone who's coming on the podcast. And it's, if you had one piece of advice that you could give yourself from when you first started teaching yoga based on everything that you now know, what would that piece of advice be?
I think it just comes down to be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself. Yeah, I think that's the most important one. And I think it's an ongoing lesson. I think that often these lessons are always ongoing lessons. I think that's, yeah, and I might change my mind later and I'll think of a better answer. But for now, it's just like, be kind to yourself. Whatever business project you're working on, or if it is like a yoga class, you know, give yourself a little bit of credit. I think sometimes often people don't give themselves enough credit. I think there's a value in taking some time to pause and perhaps just focus on gratitude and being thankful for all the energy that you did put into something. So,
yeah. I think that's amazing. I think especially when you start anything new in your life, it's easy to want to just immediately be good at it instead of sort of overcoming those humps. And it is really important to be, you know, kind to yourself if you mess up your right and left, or, you know, if you miss something. It's not the end of life. It's not the end of the world.
Not at all. And you know what's really awesome is that in the past, I would like almost be embarrassed or try to hide it. Whereas now I'm just totally own it. And I think that is actually the magic. To say, if you say put the right hand and you say, oh, I meant left hand. Nobody cares if you mess up. And I think that's what I mean by energy. Like, people don't care. Just be present, be honest. You actually show your humanness. Yeah. It's when you try to like mask and cover up and try to be perfect that's when the energy goes off and people can feel that. I do believe it all comes down to energy. So be as like natural as you can. And I feel that when you're coming from that place of just being and not trying to perform, if you mess up or you slur up your words or whatever happens, it's like, no problem. It happens to everyone. And I think your students will even in a way like you a little more for seeing your humanness and be kind to yourself. Let it be.
Yeah, totally. I think you make an amazing point about students liking you a little bit more, because I think that there's a certain element on the student side where, a teacher's walking around and they're looking at your alignment, but there's this certain I don't want to look bad. I don't want to screw up. And if the teacher can be human and make a mistake, it feels like it's almost more okay for you as the student to make a mistake.
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Amazing. I love that advice. Awesome. Well, I do want to be mindful of your time, but thank you so much for coming on to chat with me. You're super inspirational. Everything you said has resonated with me a ton. So I'm really, really glad we got the opportunity to connect.
Cool. And thank you, Amanda, and thank you for this opportunity to share. So I've enjoyed it too. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So hopefully everyone out there enjoyed the interview as much as I did. If you do want to connect with Tova or look into any of her resources, including the program she offers on creating retreats, you can check out her website, and that's tovapayne.com. Payne is Payne. And there's also links on the show notes if you visit www.mbomeyoga.com. You can definitely check that out. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, or you want to reach out about anything, please send me an email at info@mbomeyoga.com. I would love to hear from you. Sign up for the newsletter on the newsletter tab at mbomeyoga.com. You'll be the first to know about new episodes, fun little tips or tricks, or anything that's sort of inspiring me that week. And then join the community on Facebook, and it's just facebook.com/mastering the business of yoga. As always, thanks so much for listening. Bye now.